Hi, these are the most interesting historical photos that I could find. Let's go. American and Soviet soldiers met on this broken bridge like strangers who had just reached the same ending from opposite sides. This Elbe River handshake in 1945 became a rare symbol of trust before the Cold War divided the world. This is the view from the most lonely seat on a B-17, where the sky could turn dangerous in seconds. In 1944, tail crews watched over huge bomber formations from a cramped glass and metal position with almost no room to move. These Yomut Turkmen women wore towering silver-covered headdresses that showed identity, wealth, and family status at once. Photographed in Krasnovodsk in 1883, their jewelry could weigh several kilograms and was often treated like portable treasure. In 1973, Nixon and Brezhnev met on the presidential yacht Sequoia and signed a nuclear arms reduction deal that shook the Cold War. Brezhnev loved the visit so much that Nixon gave him a Lincoln Continental, which he immediately drove recklessly around Camp David, frightening his own guards. Amid smashed walls and broken furniture, Russian soldiers found a piano and played music in the ruins of Berlin in May 1945. Even surrounded by destruction, they brought a moment of life and sound to a city that had just survived total war. The massive battleship Chicago towers over workers as it waits to slide into the water at Mare Island Navy Yard in April 1930. Every rivet and steel plate had to be perfect because one mistake could turn this giant warship launch into disaster. Pablo Escobar sits surrounded by piles of cash and rubber bands in one of his warehouses in Colombia during the 1980s. He literally needed hundreds of rubber bands a day just to keep his fortune organized, showing the scale of his illegal empire. The USS Franklin limps into New York on April 28, 1945. Its deck twisted and melted after a deadly dive bomber attack near Japan. Over 800 sailors died in the strike, making this return one of the most haunting images of World War II's Pacific battles. Japanese G-3M Nell bombers fly in tight formation, showing how the Imperial Navy projected power across vast distances in the 1930s. These twin-engine planes could strike targets hundreds of miles away without fighter protection. The crew of an American M3 Stuart tank poses after their assault on Munda Airfield in August 1943, where they destroyed 30 Japanese bunkers. Their daring actions on New Georgia Island made them heroes of the Marine Corps, fighting through swamps, jungle, and heavy enemy fire. Winston Churchill wipes tears from his eyes during a tribute after resigning as Prime Minister in 1955. Though he stayed in Parliament until 1964, he would never lead Britain again, marking the end of an era. The Apollo 15 lunar rover's control panel sits ready with maps showing craters and paths for David Scott and James Irwin on their third moonwalk. Every switch and dial guided them across the lunar surface, turning a barren landscape into a carefully explored world. A de Havilland Mosquito lights up the night sky during a test firing, its guns blazing like streaks of fire. This versatile World War II aircraft could strike silently and fast, earning its nickname, the Wooden Wonder. On May 8, 1945, senior German officers signed the unconditional surrender at Berlin-Karlshorst, ending the war in Europe. This moment marked the collapse of the Third Reich, with years of brutal conflict finally coming to a stunned and fragile peace. German troops covered this locomotive in fir branches to hide it from Allied planes. But the U.S. 7th Army spotted it in April 1945. Camouflage could only do so much when the war was closing in, and even hidden machines became trophies of victory. A German soldier stands captured at Langemarck on September 26, 1917, during the Battle of Polygon Wood. Mud, exhaustion, and the endless roar of artillery are etched on his face, showing the brutal reality of World War I's front lines. In 1950, Abu Dhabi was a small desert settlement with simple buildings scattered along the coastline. This humble beginning belies its transformation into one of the world's wealthiest and most modern capitals just decades later. In June 1942, medics from the German Afrika Korps tend to a wounded British prisoner at Tobruk, Libya. Even amid fierce desert combat, soldiers had to care for enemies, showing the harsh and complicated rules of war. A Hungarian soldier drives a Karo Veloce L3 tankette across a river in northern Transylvania in autumn 1940. These small Italian-made tankettes were light and fast, but vulnerable, often used for scouting and river crossings in early World War II campaigns. A Soviet factory lunch in the 1980s could be simple, cheap, and filling enough for a full shift. Borscht, cutlet with mashed potatoes, beet salad, and dried fruit drink were everyday food for millions of workers. Rat catchers in the London Underground used a ferret to flush hidden pests from tunnels in 1950. Before modern control methods, this strange little team helped keep one of the world's busiest transport systems moving. Moscow celebrated victory in 1945, but this woman's face shows the silence behind the music. Millions came home, but millions more did not, turning joy into a memory with an empty place beside it. Madame Gustica became famous in early 20th century sideshows for smoking a pipe while wearing massive lip plates. Lip plates like these were traditional in several African cultures long before circus performers turned them into shocking entertainment for crowds. This photo is often claimed to show a Nazi leader slapping a boy, but the real context is uncertain and may be miscaptioned. By 1945, Nazi propaganda was still using young boys in uniform, even as the regime was collapsing. A Jewish family walks through Berlin in 1941 wearing yellow stars, forced labels meant to mark them in public. Under Nazi race laws, even people with Jewish grandparents who had changed faiths were still counted as Jews. A logging train lies twisted off the tracks after a bridge or rail failure deep in the forest. One broken section of track was enough to turn tons of timber and steel into a silent wreck. On April 14, 1912, Titanic's planned lifeboat drill was canceled just hours before the ship went down. The reason is still debated, but that missed practice may have left passengers and crew less ready for the night's chaos. A woman poses in 1945 with Berlin's ruins behind her, as if standing inside the remains of a fallen empire. The city had lost much of its housing and streets, turning everyday survival into a daily struggle. Robert Wadlow eats dinner with his family around 1938, already towering over the table at an almost unreal height. He became the tallest person ever reliably measured, reaching 8 feet 11.1 inches before age 23. This disturbing fairground game used real people as targets, showing how public entertainment once openly displayed cruelty and racism. Photos like this reveal a past where humiliation was sold as fun in front of ordinary crowds. English variety performer Dick Emery stood on the wing of a flying plane for a paid stunt worth 100 pounds. Long before viral videos, performers risked their lives in the sky just to shock a crowd. A man struggles through floodwater in New York on September 12, 1960, as streets vanish beneath the storm. Even one of the world's biggest cities could be brought to a standstill when heavy rain overwhelmed its streets and subway system. Jennifer Hickling demonstrates a spine treatment technique in New Zealand around 1954, using only body weight and leverage. The photo looks strange today, but manual therapy was often shown this dramatically in mid-20th century medical training. Albert Pratt patented this bizarre shooting helmet in 1916, turning a soldier's headgear into a weapon. The idea was real, but it was so impractical that it stayed more like a strange invention than battlefield gear. In 1976, Japan's Sachio Yamamoto faced Soviet giant Uljana Semjonova in the first Olympic women's basketball tournament. Semjonova stood 210 centimeters tall, and the Soviet team won every game on the way to its first Olympic gold. A masked executioner walks past a wall in Grozny, Chechnya, during the lawless years of 1997 to 1998. The covered face made him look less like a person and more like a symbol of fear in a city trapped between wars. A test house is torn apart in Nevada as scientists studied what a nuclear blast could do to ordinary homes. These staged towns showed that even a normal living room could become evidence in the atomic age. Tomei Torihama was called the mother of kamikaze because young pilots often visited her small Kyushu eatery before their final flights. After the war, she spent her life preserving their memory, carrying stories many of them never lived to tell. André Chikatilo stands at a railway stop in 1991 during a police reconstruction of his movements. This ordinary-looking scene became part of one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in Soviet history. American soldiers pile surrendered German helmets in May 1945, turning battlefield gear into a mountain of defeat. Each empty helmet marked one more soldier removed from the war as Nazi Germany collapsed. A giant ray lies on the Karachi coast in 1933, looking almost too large to be real. The Arabian Sea once held rays so wide that a single catch could draw a crowd like a public spectacle. United Press International photographer Willie Vick stands in Vietnam on August 25, 1972, carrying cameras like battlefield tools. War photographers often worked close to the front, risking their lives so the world could see what soldiers saw. By 1943, Stalingrad looked less like a city and more like a map of ruins. After months of siege and street fighting, only broken walls marked where whole neighborhoods had stood. French workers fill artillery shells with shrapnel in 1915, turning factory tables into part of the front line. Each small metal ball was packed by hand before being sent into one of the most industrial wars in history. Japanese girls waved Nazi flags to welcome Hitler Youth visitors in 1938. Showing how propaganda crossed borders before the war. The scene looks ceremonial, but it captured a growing alliance that would soon reshape the world. This is the Grossflammenwerfer, a German flamethrower from World War I that needed several men to move and operate it. It could project fire up to 40 meters, but its huge size made the crew slow, visible, and dangerously exposed. This is the entrance to a Nazi underground fortress in Cherbourg, France, photographed on June 27, 1944. German forces used tunnels and coastal strongpoints here to defend the port, but Cherbourg fell to the Allies just weeks after D-Day. This is a snaggletooth snake eel, a tropical fish that can grow around 3 feet long and live in water as shallow as 16 feet. Its nightmare-like face looks worse on land because exposure can make the eyes bulge and the mouth dry open. Galveston was left in wreckage after the Great Hurricane of 1900, the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. Around 8,000 people died, and the city later razed entire streets to survive future storms. In Wishford Magna, England, villagers recorded bread prices on churchyard stones like a public memory of everyday survival. By 1971, the wall showed how even a simple loaf could become a quiet record of rising costs. One of Britain's early mobile dinosaur displays rolled through Birmingham Carnival in 1938, towering over the street crowd. Before digital effects, a moving dinosaur on wheels was enough to make a city stop and stare. A German Ju-87 Stuka is caught at the exact moment it drops toward the ground, still nose down like a failed dive attack. The Stuka was built to terrify with precision dives, but its slow speed made it dangerously vulnerable once air superiority was lost. Me-262 jet fighters sit beside the Munich to Salzburg Autobahn, using the road as an emergency runway. These jets were faster than most Allied aircraft, but they were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Little Nap, dressed like Napoleon in 1915, was marketed as the Napoleon of the chimpanzee world. At a time before television, costumed animals could become tourist attractions and draw crowds like living curiosities. Brigitte Bardot married director Roger Vadim in 1952 when she was only 18. Just a few years later, Vadim's film helped turn her from a young bride into a global screen icon. Roald Dahl walks with Ernest Hemingway in London in 1944 when both were tied to wartime intelligence and writing. Dahl was a former fighter pilot, while Hemingway had come to Europe to report on the war. A train collision on Canada's Bay of Quinte Railway left a locomotive standing almost upright in 1895. The wreck shows how early rail power could become a steel giant, thrown off balance in seconds. These men were among the first radio listeners in Asia, reacting to human voices coming from invisible waves in the air. At the time, hearing someone speak from hundreds of kilometers away felt so unreal that many people compared radio to magic. This pig became the unlikely victim that nearly triggered a war between the United States and Britain in 1859. After an American farmer shot it on disputed San Juan Island, soldiers and warships faced each other for 13 years in what became known as the Pig War. The Klondike Gold Rush turned the Alaska border into a fight over who controlled the routes to sudden fortune. In 1903, the boundary ruling favored the United States, leaving many Canadians angry for decades. North Atlantic fishing grounds sparked long disputes between American crews and Canadian authorities from the 1780s into the early 1900s. Cod, mackerel, halibut, and lobster became more than food because each catch meant money, borders, and national pride. Bottle kilns were giant brick ovens used to fire pottery in smoky industrial towns. A single pottery city could once have hundreds of these cone-shaped kilns, blackening the sky after every firing. British commandos trained with Chariot human torpedoes for a possible attack on the German battleship Tirpitz. These tiny underwater craft carried 2 men toward huge targets, making the mission feel almost impossible. In 1903, a circus strongman held a platform of 10 people on his back like a human bridge. Before modern fitness fame, feats like this turned raw body control into live public theater. Empress Dowager Cixi is carried in a sedan chair by eunuchs in China around 1903 to 1904. She ruled from behind the throne for decades, making palace ritual look calm while the Qing dynasty was nearing its end. King Christian X rides through Copenhagen in 1940, greeting Danes after Germany occupied the country. His daily horseback rides became a quiet symbol of national unity under occupation. Neuschwanstein Castle rises in Bavaria during construction between 1868 and 1884, looking like a fairy tale built from stone. King Ludwig II never saw it fully finished, yet it later inspired one of the most famous castle images in the world. Jonas Salk helped create the first successful polio vaccine in the 1950s, protecting millions of children from a feared disease. He refused to patent the vaccine, famously saying, "Could you patent the sun?" The Soviet Lund-class Ekranoplan fires a missile during late 1980s testing, skimming just above the sea like a flying ship. It carried 6 missile launchers on its back and was built to strike from the waterline before enemies fully understood what they were seeing. On March 30, 1951, a 25th Division tank used a flamethrower against a fortified hillside position near Korea's Han River front. The photo shows how close Korean warfighting could become, with armor pushing into terrain where hidden positions were built deep into the hills. In early British penny shelters, people who paid only 1 penny could sit on hard benches through the night, but they were not allowed to sleep. Staff watched the room and woke anyone who nodded off. Around 1917, Salvation Army volunteers, known as Donut Girls, served fresh donuts to American soldiers near the front during World War I. Their simple treat became so famous that it helped create National Donut Day. In 1939, Sami reindeer herders in northern Sweden moved across deep snow with skis, sleds, and animals trained for Arctic travel. Their clothing and gear were built for long winter routes, where reindeer were transport, food, and the center of daily life. Between 1941 and 1943, Russian Orthodox priests were photographed blessing Red Army soldiers after Soviet leaders allowed limited church activity during the Second World War. The change was meant to lift morale at a desperate time. From the 17th to 19th centuries, many Japanese women practiced ohaguro, a beauty tradition where teeth were darkened with an iron-based dye. It was seen as a sign of maturity, elegance, and marriage. In 1945, Ukrainian refugees in Germany lined up for food as millions of displaced people tried to rebuild their lives after the Second World War. The children in the photo show how refugee camps became temporary homes with meals, registration, and survival replacing ordinary family life. In 1926, psychiatrist Hans Prinzhorn published this image in his study of prison art, showing a woman whose back and arms were covered with handmade tattoos. The designs include animals, faces, and symbols. In 1934, these young men stood proudly with handmade model airplanes at a time when every wing, frame, and propeller had to be cut and shaped from raw wood. Aviation fever was still sweeping the world after Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic in 1927. At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, children went to school and joined Girl Scouts inside a secret wartime city built for the Manhattan Project. Teacher Elsie Novy started the troop in 1943, so girls whose families had been moved behind the guarded fences could still feel part of normal American life. At the Brijuni Islands in the 1950s, Yugoslavia's longtime leader was photographed spearfishing in a mask, looking more like a holiday guest than a head of state. The islands later became famous as his private retreat, where world leaders, film stars, and diplomats were hosted far from the usual political stage. At the University of California, San Francisco, around 1956, Dr. Robert Stone stood beside a giant 70 million electron-volt electron synchrotron built by General Electric. The machine was used for early high-energy cancer treatment. At Universal Studios in Hollywood in 1963, prop men tested a fake boulder made of rubber so it could look heavy on camera while staying safe for actors. Tricks like this let classic films show falling rocks, cave scenes, and giant impacts without using real stone on set. In Bagnara, Calabria in 1945, a woman carried a whole swordfish on her head, showing how closely the town's daily life was tied to fishing in the Strait of Messina. Swordfish were so important along this coast that the catch moved from boats into streets and markets by hand. In March 1941, Italian infantrymen fought for Hill 731, a small height in Albania that became one of the key points of the Greco-Italian War. The hill was attacked again and again during Italy's spring offensive, but its defenders held the position. In 1940, Rafael Leonidas Trujillo was photographed stepping off a train during the height of his rule in the Dominican Republic. He controlled the country from 1930 to 1961, built a vast personal fortune, and became known as one of the most powerful and feared rulers in the Caribbean. On May 19, 1962, a famous actress sang a birthday tribute to the United States President at Madison Square Garden, 10 days before his 45th birthday. The brief performance became one of the most remembered moments where Hollywood, politics, and live television met in the 1960s. In 1889, Paris held the Exposition Universelle, and the newly built Eiffel Tower rose above the fairgrounds as the tallest man-made structure in the world. Many critics first called it ugly, but millions of visitors came to see it. In April 1943, soldier Louis Zwern of Queens said goodbye to his wife's side and baby daughter Jackie at Penn Station in New York. Photographer Alfred Eisenstadt captured the moment for Life magazine, turning one family's farewell into one of the most human images of the Second World War. Inside the Japanese battleship Congo, crewmen stood beside a massive 14-inch Vickers naval gun built to fire shells weighing more than half a ton. The photo reveals the hidden factory-like space behind one shot, where machines, loaders, and aiming gear had to work together before the gun ever faced the sea. In August 1968, Soviet-led Warsaw Pact tanks filled the streets of Prague after Czechoslovakia tried to loosen censorship and give people more political freedom. The Prague Spring ended under heavy military pressure. In 1991, a Kurdish Peshmerga fighter in northern Iraq was photographed during the uprisings that followed the Gulf War, when Kurdish groups briefly pushed Baghdad's forces out of several towns. The revolt was later put down, but it helped lead to the no-fly zone that gave Iraqi Kurdistan the space to build its own self-rule. In September 1945, surviving Japanese soldiers on Mila Island returned from fishing after the war had already ended, and the island had surrendered. The photo shows how isolated Pacific garrisons had to keep living day by day. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first person to travel into space, completing one orbit around Earth aboard Vostok 1. The flight lasted 108 minutes, but it turned him from a young Soviet pilot into a global symbol of the space age. On May 11, 1936, the Hindenburg's gondola was surrounded by ground crew at Lakehurst, New Jersey, as the giant airship prepared for another Atlantic crossing. At the time, it was a symbol of luxury air travel, less than 1 year before Lakehurst became forever linked to the airship's final landing. In 1988, a Soviet soldier in Kandahar province drank water from a local Afghan vessel during the final phase of the Soviet military campaign in Afghanistan. The photo is striking because one quiet exchange appears in the middle of a conflict that was already moving toward the Soviet withdrawal. In the early 1900s, electrical crews in Maine raised utility poles by hand with ropes, horses, and a simple wagon full of tools. Before bucket trucks existed, one worker climbed high above the road, while the rest held the line steady from the ground. On July 12, 1979, Chicago radio host Steve Dahl's Disco Demolition Night filled Comiskey Park with people who got discount tickets for bringing disco records. When the records were destroyed between games, fans flooded the field. The White Sox had to forfeit the second game. In June 1941, Seaman Robert Tilburn of Leeds was photographed walking with his young brother after becoming one of only 3 men to survive the loss of HMS Hood. The ship had carried 1,418 men. In 1926 and 1927, Breton traders crossed from France to London with strings of pink Roscoff onions over their shoulders, selling them door to door. Known as Onion Johnnies, they turned one regional crop into one of the most famous French street trades in Britain. In May 1945, British forces placed this sign at Bergen-Belsen after liberating the camp on April 15th. Soon after, the remaining buildings were burned for sanitation, leaving the sign as an early public record of what was found there. In 1982, the Soviet Venera 13 lander sent back one of the clearest views ever taken from the surface of Venus. It survived just over 2 hours in about 900 degrees Fahrenheit and crushing pressure, giving humanity a rare direct look at another planet's ground. In 1939, Polish scouts as young as 11 wore military-style uniforms and trained in discipline, first aid, and map reading. After Poland was occupied, many older scouts joined the Grey Ranks network as couriers, lookouts, and secret teachers. In 1936, this family in Drenthe, Netherlands, lived in a sod house built from earth, peat, wood, and scrap materials. Such homes were cheap to build, but cold and damp, showing how harsh rural life could still be in Europe before the Second World War. In 1967, this milkman loaded glass bottles into a Ford delivery van for daily doorstep rounds. Before plastic cartons and supermarket shopping took over, fresh milk was brought straight to homes and the empty bottles were collected for reuse. Between 1861 and 1865, this unidentified Union soldier posed in full uniform with his rifle and belt plate marked United States. Colorized portraits like this make the Civil War feel closer, turning one unknown serviceman into a clear face from a divided America. In the winter of 1898 and 1899, Breckenridge, Colorado, was covered by more than 20 feet of snow. People carved tunnels through the streets so shops, homes, and daily life could keep going. Built into a medieval stone wall in Toledo, Spain, this tiny opening is smaller than an adult palm and has puzzled historians for centuries with no confirmed purpose. Some believe it was used to pass food to prisoners. Others think it was a secret message slot. While we're looking at these photos, don't forget to write in the comments. Which historical shot did you like the most, and for what reason? Men sit inside a Goldthwait, Texas barbershop in 1928, when a haircut often came with news, gossip, and local politics. Before television filled small-town homes, places like this were where people heard the town's real stories. On August 7, 1974, Philippe Petit walked a wire between the Twin Towers with no safety net, more than 400 meters above New York. He stayed up there for about 45 minutes, turning an illegal stunt into one of history's most unreal public performances. This 1985 computer lab shows Atari 800 and Apple II systems when personal computing still meant sharing a room full of machines. A modern smartphone is far more powerful than every computer here combined, but labs like this trained the first digital generation. German prisoners surrendered their rifles to British troops in the Netherlands on May 10, 1945. The huge pile of weapons shows how fast an army became powerless after Germany's surrender. Stevan Markovitch, once a bodyguard for French star Alain Delon, was found in Elancourt, France on October 1, 1968. His case pulled cinema, politics, and high society into one of France's most mysterious scandals. On May 10, 1926, sabotage meant for a coal train derailed the Flying Scotsman near Cramlington instead. The passenger train was carrying 281 people, turning a strike action into a shocking railway disaster. This B-25. Mitchell shows its heavy nose guns, built to pour fire straight ahead during low-level attacks. Some versions carried up to 14 forward-firing guns, turning a medium bomber into a flying battering ram. Karelian children sit on Finnish soldiers' knees during the Aunis expedition in Karelia in 1919. The photo shows the human side of the Heimosodat, when border wars pulled even remote villages into history. Albert Speer stands with Adolf Hitler at the Berghof in 1939, years before he became one of the regime's most powerful organizers. After the war, he built the image of the good Nazi, served 20 years in prison, and later became a best-selling author. Che Guevara walks across Red Square in Moscow in November 1964, wrapped in a winter coat far from Cuba's heat. That same year, he visited the Soviet Union to secure support as Cuba became one of Moscow's key Cold War allies. IBM's Deep Blue defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov in New York City in 1997, shocking millions who believed humans would always dominate chess. It became the first computer to beat a reigning world champion in a full match under standard tournament rules. Romanian legionary police pose with handguns in November 1940, shortly before the unit was dissolved. Their own regime shut them down after clashes with regular police, proving they were too chaotic even for wartime Romania. Morgana, the kissing bandit, runs toward Fred Lynn during a California Angels game on June 9, 1983. She became famous for rushing baseball fields to kiss star players, turning repeated arrests into strange sports celebrity. A computer operator works beside a Soviet BESM-6 in Lithuania in 1974, surrounded by glowing panels and paper output. This machine could perform about 1 million operations per second, making it one of the USSR's most powerful computers. A Soviet soldier sits with Afghan locals in Kandahar during the 1980s, trying hashish far from home. The photo captures a strange, quiet moment inside the Soviet-Afghan War, where soldiers faced both combat and a completely unfamiliar world. Finejiro Asanuma sits at home with his cat in 1960, showing a calm private side of Japan's Socialist Party leader. That same year, he was publicly assassinated during a televised political debate, shocking the entire country. A Japanese D-3A Type 99 dive bomber flies over the Coral Sea on May 7, 1942, during the first major carrier battle in history. Planes like this helped decide the battle without the opposing fleets ever directly seeing each other. Mountain Jews from Azerbaijan's Kuba district pose in 1883, wearing clothing that mixed Caucasus style with Jewish tradition. Their community spoke Juhuri, a rare Jewish language rooted in Persian. A truck packed with rabbits shows Australia's ecological crisis after the animals spread wildly from a small release in 1859. By the 1920s, rabbits may have reached around 10 billion, forcing Australia to build giant fences against a tiny invader. A Taiwanese conscript sits with his family during World War II, when Taiwan was still under Japanese rule. Over 200,000 Taiwanese served in Japan's military before the island returned to Chinese control in 1945. A farming family with 13 children gathers outside their home in Quebec, Canada, in 1950. Large rural families like this were common in French-Canadian communities, where children often helped run the farm from a very young age. Ethnic Albanians cheer American NATO troops entering Gunjilane during the Kosovo War in 1999. The God Bless America graffiti shows how foreign soldiers were greeted there as protection, not occupation. Liquid sarin spreads across a Tokyo subway car floor after the March 1995 attack carried out by the Aum Shinrikyo cult. The nerve gas killed 14 people and injured thousands, becoming one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in modern Japanese history. The Josephine Ford was the Fokker aircraft Richard Byrd used for his claimed North Pole flight on May 9, 1926. The achievement made him famous, but later, researchers questioned whether the plane truly reached the pole. A Korean government official poses with his wife in 1904, both dressed in formal traditional clothing. This was photographed just before Japan tightened control over Korea, making portraits like this a quiet record of a fading royal-era world. People stare at a salvaged turret from the Japanese battleship Mutsu in 1970, lifted decades after the ship's sudden loss. Mutsu exploded at anchor in 1943, sinking so fast that one of Japan's own battleships became a mystery beneath the sea. On May 9, 1945, freed political prisoners and deportees marched through Paris during victory in Europe celebrations. Their striped camp clothes turned the Arc de Triomphe into a reminder that victory also carried deep scars. American troops huddled behind palm trees during the Rendova Island landing on June 30, 1943. They came ashore at dawn in heavy rain, using wet tree trunks as cover in the Solomon Islands campaign. U.S. and ARVN armored forces lined the streets of Cholon in Saigon on May 9, 1968. The district became a battlefield during the Tet Offensive's aftermath, when tanks guarded city blocks instead of open fields. On July 12, 1979, Disco Demolition Night turned a Chicago White Sox promotion into a full stadium meltdown. More than 45,000 fans showed up, stormed the field, and forced the team to forfeit the second game. Afghan communist soldiers parade through Kabul after the April Revolution on April 27, 1978. That takeover promised a new future, but it soon pushed Afghanistan into years of coups, Soviet intervention, and war. Italian armored units passed Napoleon's monument in Ajaccio, Corsica, during the Axis occupation in 1942. The birthplace of Napoleon was now under foreign control, a sharp twist for an island tied to French power. A captured Italian M13/40 tank is used by German forces in Bosnia in early 1945. By then, Germany was so desperate for armor that even outdated Allied tanks were pushed back into service. Smoke rises from Italian-held Fort Gallabat during a British and Sudanese counteroffensive on November 22, 1940. This remote border fort became part of the wider East African campaign, where Italy's empire began to crack. On June 10, 1940, Benito Mussolini faced a huge crowd from Rome's Palazzo Venezia and declared war on France and Britain. With one balcony speech, Italy officially entered World War II and tied its future to Nazi Germany. In 1932, Australia sent soldiers with machine guns to stop emus from destroying wheat farms. The birds scattered so effectively that the failed operation became famous as the Emu War. New Year's Eve at Sammy's Bowery Follies in Manhattan around 1945 looked like chaos packed into one dive bar. The place was famous for mixing celebrities, sailors, performers, and street characters in the same smoky room. A Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighter attacks a Japanese transport convoy during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea on March 3, 1943. The devastating air assault destroyed Japan's attempt to reinforce New Guinea and left thousands of stranded soldiers to face jungle warfare and starvation. Agnès Leroux, heiress to the Palais de la Méditerranée Fortune, vanished on October 27, 1977, after being seen with Jean-Maurice Agnelet. Her body was never found, turning a Riviera inheritance dispute into one of France's most haunting mystery cases. Mary Read stands outside her Pittsburgh home in July 1964, holding racist threats sent to her family. The notes show how the Civil Rights era was fought not only in marches, but on ordinary front porches. London crowds flood the streets on VE Day in 1945, surrounding even a double-decker bus in celebration. After nearly 6 years of war, victory turned the city itself into one giant gathering place. King's African Rifles soldiers rest near Kismayo in 1941 during the East African Campaign. African troops were central to Britain's advance against Italian forces, yet their role is often left out of the main war story. A German Fallschirmjäger sits on a Zundap KS 750 motorcycle in Italy in September 1943. This rugged sidecar machine was built for rough terrain, giving paratroopers fast movement after Mussolini's fall. Clowns walk through New York City in 1953, looking strangely out of place beside normal shops and restaurants. Before viral street stunts, a painted face on a busy sidewalk was enough to stop people cold. 3 RAF Spitfire LF Mark 5Bs fly off the Tunisian coast after escorting bombers toward Merith in 1943. These fighters helped protect Allied air attacks during the final push against Axis forces in North Africa. An Ainu woman from northern Japan wears traditional mouth tattoos, photographed sometime between the 1900s and 1940s. For Ainu women, these tattoos marked adulthood and beauty before the practice was banned by Japanese authorities. David Attenborough met young Prince Charles and Princess Anne at London's Lime Grove Studios in 1958. Decades later, the broadcaster who showed them a white bird would become one of the most trusted nature voices on Earth. The Ford Aurora. Two Concept from 1969 tried to turn a station wagon into a rolling living room. Its front passenger seat could swivel backward, making the car feel more like a lounge than transport. Christopher Lee married Birgit Krunke in 1961, long before many fans knew him as cinema's most elegant villain. Their marriage lasted 55 years, almost as legendary as the characters he later played. Allied soldiers from South Africa, New Zealand, and India laughed together on a Cairo street in 1942. The photo shows how World War II pulled men from distant colonies into the same dusty city far from home. A farmer's wife sits with her 3 children in Northam, Minnesota in 1937, surrounded by the plain reality of rural hardship. During the Great Depression, homes like this carried the weight of poverty in every worn chair, loose paper, and quiet face. Winston Churchill waves over Whitehall on May 8, 1945, as London celebrates victory in Europe. The crowd cheered him like a wartime hero, but within weeks, Britain would vote him out of office. Disneyland's Mad Tea Party opened with the park on July 17, 1955, filling Fantasyland with spinning pastel teacups. Guests could control how fast they spun, turning a gentle ride into instant dizziness by hand. In 1924, Nobel Prize-winning poet Rabindranath Tagore visited Buenos Aires, where writer Victoria Ocampo hosted him and became deeply influenced by his ideas. Tagore had become the first non-European Nobel Prize winner in literature in 1913. In 1981, East German cosmonaut Sigmund Jähn stood beside Yuri Gagarin's bust at Berlin's Archival observatory. Jähn had become the first German in space in 1978, flying on Soyuz 31 as part of the Soviet Interkosmos program. On May 9, 1976, German left-wing militant Ulrike Meinhof was found dead in her prison cell. Her death became one of West Germany's most controversial moments, deepening the mystery around the Red Army faction. Janusz Korczak, a Polish Jewish doctor and writer, ran a Warsaw orphanage as a children's republic where children had their own court and newspaper. In August 1942, he refused chances to escape and stayed with his orphans when they were deported to Treblinka. Hugo Pratt poses with his father in 1941, years before creating the famous comic adventurer Corto Maltese. He was reportedly one of the youngest soldiers in Mussolini's army, turning childhood into a uniform far too early. German wounded are carried on improvised stretchers to a field hospital in April 1917. The long line shows how World War I turned even the walk to medical help into a slow fight for survival. A German Me-262 lowers its wheels after running out of fuel, while a P-47 Thunderbolt stays behind it. Even the world's first operational jet fighter could become helpless when fuel, runway, and timing disappeared at once. Tsarevich Alexei of Russia visited soldiers during World War I, wearing a uniform covered with medals while still only a child. He reportedly refused palace food and ate soldiers' black bread instead, saying it was what the men at the front ate. Andrei Turkin was a Wimpel officer who died during the Beslan hostage rescue operation in 2004. He was later named a hero of Russia, remembered for shielding others in one of the country's darkest school tragedies. Grand Duchesses Maria and Anastasia performed Molière's Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme in costume at Spala in 1912. The playful royal scene was photographed only 6 years before the Romanov world vanished forever. On May 1, 1993, a Labor Day march in Moscow turned into street clashes between demonstrators and police. More than 200 people were reportedly hospitalized, turning a workers' holiday into one of post-Soviet Russia's first major public confrontations. Paul Robeson testified before the House Committee on Un-American Activities on June 12, 1956, after his passport was revoked. The former football star, singer, actor, and activist refused to sign a loyalty affidavit and later regained his passport after a Supreme Court ruling. A family from the Russian Empire stands in the snow around 1897, dressed for a hard rural winter. The quiet portrait captures a world that would be shaken by revolution just 20 years later. Alexander Kolchak, leader of the White Movement, was executed by the Bolsheviks in Irkutsk on February 7, 1920. Once a polar explorer and admiral, he became one of the most famous defeated figures of the Russian Civil War. East African pioneers stand in formation in 1943, part of the Allied fight against Vichy France in Madagascar and Fascist Italy in East Africa. Many served far from home, yet their role in World War II is still barely remembered. A street milk seller poses in the Russian Empire in the 1870s, carrying her trade in a wooden cart and metal jugs. Before shops and fridges were common, fresh milk often reached homes through sellers like her. White Rose students in Germany, 1942, quietly built one of the bravest anti-Nazi resistance networks from inside the country. Their leaflets urged Germans to think for themselves, a choice that made ordinary university students terrifying to the regime. USS Yorktown's SBD-3 dive bombers sit ready on the flight deck in the Coral Sea in April 1942. Weeks later, these aircraft helped fight the first naval battle, where opposing ships never saw each other. Ella Mae Morris records in the 1950s or 1960s, standing at a Capitol microphone with the ease of a studio veteran. Her 1942 hit, Cow Cow Boogie, helped Capitol Records earn its first gold record. On May 8, 1945, London erupted in celebration after Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally. For millions in Europe, the announcement ended nearly 6 years of war, fear, and waiting. Austro-Hungarian soldiers of the 47th Infantry Regiment rest at a fortified railway tunnel near Steven in 1917. That tunnel became a cavern shelter on the Hermata front, where fighting helped block Italy's push toward Trieste. Young Union soldiers pose at camp during the American Civil War, around 1863 to 1865. Some boys entered the Army as drummers or helpers, making childhood part of the war machine. Berlin's police commander is arrested during the Prussian coup in 1932, when Chancellor Franz von Papen removed Prussia's elected Social Democratic government. The takeover weakened Germany's last major democratic stronghold just months before Hitler came to power. A parade in India promotes the national smallpox eradication campaign during the 1970s. Just a few years later, smallpox became the first human disease completely erased from Earth. On May 8, 1945, huge crowds filled central London for victory in Europe. Day after Germany's surrender ended the war in Europe. Many waited near Whitehall and Buckingham Palace for official announcements, royal appearances, and the first open celebration after years of blackouts and rationing. In 1944, these military nurses took a rare break beside a jeep after long shifts in wartime medical units. Thousands of women served close to the front, keeping field hospitals running under pressure most civilians never saw. In May 1942, this Soviet Jewish commissar was captured by German troops, who reportedly hesitated because his face matched the look their own propaganda praised. The photo is striking because appearance briefly confused Nazi racial ideology, but it did not save him. In Kentucky in 1920, a large white crowd gathered outside a courthouse during the trial of a black man accused in a highly publicized case. Reports said some came hoping to witness mob justice, showing how easily a courtroom could be surrounded by racial intimidation in that era. I will be very grateful for your subscription to the channel. Every day I try to tell you about such interesting historical photos.